Okay, welcome back. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. So we get the entire IFC model selected here. So again, you click the objects, make sure you're on types, and make sure all the type folders are selected. Obviously, as I said last week, you can drill down into the subfolders and select different items. Now we're going to do a little bit of takeoff today. So just going to go back to my view, and we're going to do some takeoff on the foundations. So we don't have to do this, but I'm going to select the foundations first that I want to take off, more from a visual perspective rather than selecting them first to do the takeoff, because in the actual advanced reports folder I can make the selection based on the objects in the criteria of that particular application. But for a visualization and going back and forth just to see my foundations and select the different objects from the different foundations just to see exactly which one is which, I'm going to select my foundations first. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I'm going to make sure that I uncheck everything, and I'm going to check box my footings, my strip footings. Now, I think I said last week that some of my foundations are in the slab category. So IFC doesn't necessarily put everything in where you'd expect it to be. Some of the pad foundations are drawn in the slab, IFC slab category. So I'm going to check that. But what it does is it shows all the floors that is also associated with the slab category. I'm going to drill down and uncheck the things that I don't need. So floor, ground floor. The next one, I don't need the stairs, I don't need the next first floor, and then I'm going to uncheck the roof. So what I'm left with there is the foundations, pad foundations, and strip foundations. Okay, so leaving that as it is, I might uncheck slabs there, or collapse the slabs. I'm going to go into my plugins. So part of your educational version of BIM Vision, you'll get a number of plugins, a number of add-ons. One of them is this advanced reports, and pretty much essentially it's an exporter for Excel. So I want to export these objects and their associated quantities and labels out into Excel so I can start filtering them, maybe creating a pivot table and extracting some quantities and organizing in such a way that maybe I can use those quantities in a cost plan. So I'm going to click Advanced Reports. Now this is the interface that I need to use, Advanced Reports, to start creating my, I suppose, my spreadsheet first in this functionality, and then exporting it from this into Excel. So I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to select the custom selector, because this is what's going to tell me. There is other ways of selecting the objects that you want to export. You could click active, and I think because I've selected the foundations in the visual tool, I'll pretty much get everything I need, but it takes in some things that you don't need then as well. So I tend to use, from an objects perspective, I tend to use the custom selector. Okay, so let's use the custom selector to tell the software what objects we want to utilize and only take off. So I'm going to click custom selector. I'm going to come down here and click add. So I want to use, if it's not there, I want to use the IFC type. So that first folder in the type name, that's what I'm going to use to match my entity. So IFC type equals or match, let's say match, a little drop down in the op column there. And then the value, I'm going to click over here in a little drop down box, and I'm going to scroll down for my IFC footing category. Okay, now at any time I can preview, hit the preview tab, and it's showing what it's using there. So it's my entire IFC category with its particular name, the name of the object, and I'll show you that in a second. That's already defaulted in there into the columns. So I'm going to go back. Now remember that I could also do this, take the IFC, match it to, and then drop down the slab, because that's where the rest of my pads are located. But what happens when I do that is if I preview, I get everything that's in the slab, not just the foundations, but also the floors. Now I don't want that. I could basically use it, then when I bring it into Excel, delete what I don't need, but I might as well use it correctly here. So I'm going to click back on objects, and instead of doing that, I'm actually going to take the name. Okay, so the name of the property. Match is fine, and I'm going to type in pad or pile cap. Okay, and that is essentially going to look for the name. If I actually show you here what that means, I can see here if I click the slab that is the name of the slab there, pile cap. So if I'm looking for, and if I take that out there, if I'm just looking for anything associated with the name of the object that has pile cap in it, the word pile cap in it, it'll extract the quantities from anything that has pile cap. Okay, so realistically you'll just take the pile caps. So if I do a little preview there, you can see that my 4 pile caps and another 4 down here have come into my, I suppose, my functionality here. So that's enough for the moment in terms of what I want to take off. My IFC footing in its entirety, and then pile cap, which is part of the slab entity. So I'm going to click on columns. Now, what do I want to bring in here in terms of information from the objects? So as I said before, if you click on a foundation here in terms of what's in any one particular object, and this one is a 900 strip footing, you'll see a world of information. From a QS perspective, I don't need all that information, but I certainly need dimensions, naming of the objects, and maybe story, the location of the object itself, and some other entities. So I can tell, just like I would have done in Costex, and I think I've given you a tutorial on that. This is very similar to the model maps functionality, where you're selecting how you want to, I suppose, map the quantities out into your takeoff. So this is similar to what you're doing there. It's just slightly different in terms of the interface. So I'm going to click in columns here, and I'm going to click add. Now it already defaults as IFC entity, so that will tell me what category of IFC of the IFC folder it's in, so whether it's IFC footing or IFC slab. It'll also pull the name of the object. In this case it's wall foundation 900 strip footing, and there's a number associated with it. If I click the next one, slightly different number but the same name. And then I can add I suppose objects here, or object criteria, so parameters. I'm going to check down here, show only available properties. So I don't want everything showing that's not necessarily associated with the objects I've selected, those foundations and those pad foundations. I also want to click, the first thing I want to click is link to objects. So I'll show you what that means in a second when we get to doing our quantity takeoff and looking at our quantity. So I'm going to check that. Both the IFC and the name is already checked. I've already brought that in. What else do I need to take in here? I'm going to scroll down. Location, certainly I might check the story. Where is that foundation located? Now I can take in the base quantities. If you can remember from what I explained before, base quantities are exported quantities from IFC in that process. Some of the objects have base quantities and some of them don't. I believe either the slabs has it and the footings, IFC footings doesn't. So in this particular exercise, I'm going to ignore them. I could take them in and kind of compare what I do have to the actual dimensions that come from the Revit parameters. But I'm just going to leave them for the moment. You can play around with that if you want, just to see how the quantities compare. But I'm certainly going to take in all my dimension quantities. Now, as I said, there's a number of ways quantities come into your 5D software. They come in with the base quantities if it's an IFC file. If you've checked the Revit parameters, they will come in as dimensions from Revit. And some software also calculates the quantities on an import, so you could have 3 sets or even 4 sets of different quantities. Adds a little bit of confusion, but once you know how to navigate them, how to use them, how to compare them, it actually makes life a little bit easier, making sure you've got consensus in your quantities across the maybe 3 or 4 different types. So area, I'll certainly take length, I'll take thickness, I'll take volume, I'll take width. Any other thing here in dimensions type, let's take width again. Looks like there's 2 types of dimensions there, dimensions and dimensions type, with both the same parameter. Foundation thickness as well, just in case. You'll see why I do this in a second. any identity data I need, I remember that I actually put in some National Standard Building Element codes into the comments parameter in the exercises we did in Revit. So let's check that, because that could have a National Standard Building Elements of element 19. You could have coded it in the keynote. In that case, you might take the keynote, or it could have been even done in the assembly code. We showed you that. Other things I might take in, you could take structural material in. Let's maybe check that. Let's maybe check them both. Something I always take in is the family and type name. Okay, there we go. And looks like we're all right there. That's everything I need. I could start checking a load more just to see, but I'm not going to be too excessive based on the tutorial and make it too complicated. But again, you can play around with this yourself and see what happens. So that's everything I'm going to bring in terms of information. If I click OK, I'll get a list of quants here, or let's say, I suppose, columns. So it's going to be broken up, if I look preview, per the different columns: IFC entity, name, link, and if I scroll across, all my dimensions that I've selected to go in with that, as well as comments and some other identity data, structural material, and then the family and type name. So I should be happy enough with that. I have it minimized there, but I could have maximized it. You have an opportunity to kind of group here if you wanted to just use this particular functionality and not actually export it into Revit. You could group by, let's say, IFC entity. You could group them by story, and then maybe you could sum your quantities based on volume, and that slightly change how that is broken up there based on groups. But that's fine. I find it easier actually not to do any of that, because I'm going to do that grouping together in Excel. So I'm going to click back objects I had put in based on what I want to select or do my quantity takeoff on. Then I created all the different columns that I want to see in my export. Preview is kind of handy. You do the same thing in Costex, going between your model map definition and your preview, and this is kind of the same thing that you're doing in that model map. So it's worth comparing what you're doing with the foundations in that particular exercise in Costex to this particular exercise, because it really is the same thing, what you call mapping. So you're basically mapping information from the data in the building information modeling to the way you want it to be coming out into your software. So click preview. Now what I want to do is I want to save this file. This link to object is fantastic, because what I'll do in Excel, you'll see in a second, is when I do export in Excel, I can click that link and it'll show me that particular object back in the view of BIM Vision. So I think that is enough. I may have to go back to it, but I think that is okay. And I'm going to click save to file. Now where I want to save it doesn't really matter. You can save it to your desktop. I'll save it there in my IFC file. It goes through an export process and it opens up. Okay, we're going to take a look at the exported Excel file from BIM Vision. What we have is across the top, we got the actual object properties that we selected in the Advanced Reports tool. So we have the IFC entity itself and the name of the object. We got this link to the object, which I'll show you in a second. The different stories that each object is located on. And we've got area, length, thickness, volume, width. We've got another width actually, which is a dimension type rather than just a single dimension name. And we got some identity data. So we got some naming data. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to create a pivot table to extract some quantities. Before we do that, we want to take a look at these quantities and make sure that they're okay and validate them. Based on my experience, some can be correct, some might be a little bit off for whatever reason, depending on how the architect drew the object or drew the model. Let's take a look at what we have here. So that's the name of the object. This is the story. Looking at the story, it says most of them are in the top of the foundation story, as such, or the foundation plan, and then we got a number on the ground floor. Now that I believe that is a mistake. Just a labeling mistake in Revit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it. So I'm just going to take those 4 items and paste them into ground floor, so they're all on the foundation plan, so to speak. I may or may not use that object property in my pivot table when I'm using my ways for filtering the information. The area, I'll leave that as is. The length, okay, and I've got the thickness, but I've also got a foundation thickness. Now it looks as if some of the objects have their thicknesses in this particular object property, and some of them have it in this particular. So I'm not going to have 2 separate ones, so I'm going to just drag that across there and drop it in there, and do the same with these ones. So I've just got 1 object property for thickness. I don't want to be duplicating too much, so there's a little bit of manipulation. And then I'm going to delete this row. Don't need it, there's nothing in it. So area, length, volume, width, and thickness. So I've got 2 widths. This one is full, looks like it's okay. That one's 900, 900. I'm missing some out of this one, 815. So I'm going to delete this one because it's missing a few quants, whereas this one has them all. So let's delete that. It is worthwhile probably doing this rather than selecting just a few things in BIM Vision to export. Why not just export everything, and then you can delete what you need or don't need in Excel. Same goes for structural material. I've got 2 different materials. I've got material finishes and material finishes type for structural material. So I'm just going to bring that over and bring them all into the same object property, and then delete. Okay. And then I've got the type name, and for the moment that's okay. So let's take a look at what we got going on here. So we got our wall foundations of different sizes or different widths, and we got the pile caps, or I suppose pads, pile pads of, well, they're all the same, 1800 by 1800 by 500 millimeters deep. And what I might do is look at a foundation just to give you a heads up on how things might come in here. Based on my own experience, the length of foundations, the length of walls that come in as a dimension into your quantity surveying software aren't necessarily always accurate. Okay, now I'll show you what I mean in a second. So let's select one of these dimensions. So let's look at the length, and let's take maybe this one here. That is 4483. Now that's in millimeters across the top. Now to select and to see that dimension or that object in the actual BIM Vision tool, I have this linked object, and that's very important when you're exporting to have selected that. And I want to basically see that particular object. I can see that's got an area of 2.989 or 2.99 meters squared. It's saying that's a length of 4,483 millimeters, or 4.4 or 4.5 meters. It's got a volume of 0.911, and there's the width and thickness in millimeters. Okay, so let's take a look at that. How do I take a look at it? Well, I click on the link. I click on it. Now it seems like nothing's happened, but if I go back to my BIM Vision tool, click on it, I'm just going to minimize that. That is the foundation there that I've selected. So there's a link now between what I select in Excel with that link and what is shown up here. So in terms of my length, I can do a little measurement here. Click measurement, click length on edge, and just have a look there, 3.668. So that's a little bit shorter than what is shown in our dimensions of our length in Excel, or what comes out of the properties. In fact, I can see it there if I scroll down. Go down to my dimensions. In fact, the length isn't there for some reason. Oh, I may have to go up. There it is there, 4.483. So that's not correct based on what's shown there in terms of this kind of length measure. This is almost like you do in Cupid or Costex for a 2D measure check, and what's exporting there. Now, the reason for that could be depending on how it's modeled. And if it's modeled correctly, that should be 3.668 from edge to edge. But it could be that that is kind of extending into the center line, or there's an overlap, or it's adding the length to its width, or it's adding the length to its width and its thickness. It just depends on how that comes out. So watch lengths. Usually the rest are okay, be it area or volume. But when you got a 3D object like this, be it a wall or be it a foundation, a solid object as such, the lengths need to be double checked. So I'll show you how to do that. That's 3.668. If I wanted to check the area, I'm going to click area, same pane, click it, 2.989, 2.988, that's okay, so that is exporting correctly. And then click volume from selection, so it's already selected, and the volume is 0.911, and there's my volume, 0.911. So I'm going to go back to my Excel. I'm happy enough with my volume, I'm happy enough with my area, the top area or the plane area, but I'm not necessarily happy with that length. Now I could check a few more just to see, and but you will notice that that the length in most of them is not correct. So how do I get the length? I might need the length for my formwork, because length times the width or thickness times both sides is the total area of my formwork. And if I don't have the true length, I might be over measuring it based on what's going on here. So let's do a kind of a check here. Let's, in between length and volume, insert a row. So insert, click H, insert column. So what have I got going on there? I'm going to add in length, check. Okay, and I'm going to check my length against my volume. So I'm going to click on my first object here. Now just be careful, because my length is in millimeters here, and my volume is in meters. My width is in millimeters rather than meters, and my foundation thickness is also in millimeters. So I might do a little bit of conversion. So I'm going to start by creating a formula, equals, and I'm going to divide my volume by my width, essentially to get my area. So I'm going to divide up here. So divide. Now I'm going to click the width, but I'm going to divide that by 1,000 to change it to meters. And then I'm going to divide that area by my thickness, and also divide my thickness by 1,000 to change it to meters. So logically, what I'm doing is I am working off the volume, or using the volume to calculate my area. So if I know what the width is, and if I know what the thickness of the foundation is, if I divide the volume by the width and then get that resultant factor and then divide it again by the thickness, I should get the area. So that's what's happening there. The volume divided by the width, and of course I've changed the width to meters, so that'll change from 900 by dividing it by 1,000 to 0.9, and the same for the foundation thickness is at 300. So once I hit return there, I get a length, and this is going to be in meters, so I might as well put meters up there instead of millimeters, of 10.735. Well, there's a load of different additional decimal places there, which is fine. So I'm going to copy that or fill it down. I'll fill it down into there. Now I'm not going to do it for this one because it's not a true length as such, based on what's going on here, because these are pads. They're different than the strip foundation. So I'll leave that and get back to it in a second. Copy and then paste it there, and bring down those all the way to, because they're all my strip footings, to there. And there's my rain and pads. So there's my strip footings. The rest of my objects are pads, and there's my true length, so slightly different based on the calculations. If I click any one of them, I can see that it's still pulling from the right cells based on what I did above here. Moving it down, those lengths are correct there, so you know that the pads, it's saying that it's 1.8 by 1.8 by 0.5, and I can see 1.8, 1.8 and 500 millimeters there. So I really don't need to do anything with that as a length check, because it is correct. But I did need to do with this in terms of the strip footings. What I'm also going to do here is I'm going to add a few additional quants. So I've got volume, I've got length check, and we've got my width, etc. I am going to, maybe right here, front of comments, doesn't matter where, I'm going to insert a few columns. And what I need for my foundations, of course, from a quantity surveying perspective, is not just the volume of my concrete, I need my formwork. This is why I actually use the length check, and I need my reinforcement. Okay, so formwork and reinforcement, and I'm going to start with reinforcement, and I'm going to work this off the volume. You've done this before, and you probably did it in Costex or Cupid. And I'm going to click equals. I'm going to click my volume, so I'm going to link it to that cell, and I'm going to multiply it by, let's say, there's 250 kg of steel reinforcement in 1 cubic meter of concrete foundations. So I'll put brackets around that, and I'll divide it by 1,000 to change it to tons. So what have I got there? 0.72 tons. If I bring that down, just to check, is it working on this one as well? And dividing by 1,000, that's fine. And then I'll fill it all the way down. Okay. So there's my total reinforcement per my different volumes. Click any cell just to make sure. Let's say the pad. It's worked off the volume, multiplied by 250, divided by 1,000. Where did I get the 250 kg per meter cubed? Well, it's just the rule of thumb. Maybe I call the engineer and ask for that. Or maybe I did a kind of a sample measurement for a cubic meter based on my reinforcement schedule if I had one. But let's take it that it's 250 kg per meter cubed. It's on the high side, but that's fine for foundations. From the formwork, I'm going to click equals. I'm going to take the length check because that really is the correct one. So click that. Multiply it by 2 because both sides of my foundations from my strip foundations point of view is getting formwork. Multiply it by 2 and then multiply it by thickness. So where's my thickness? There it is there, 300. Now be careful because that is meters and the foundation thickness is millimeters. So let's convert the foundation thickness to meters by dividing it by 1,000 in terms of the cell. There we go. Click enter. So there's my formwork. Now that is in meters squared. So just to put it up there, the reinforcement is in tons. So let's put that there. Let's drill that down. Okay, let's bring it all the way down and see what happens. And you'll see that we've got quantities in all the cells, I suppose, that are associated with the strip footings. Now, I'm going to change this here for the pad footings from a formwork perspective because it's calculated a little bit differently. It's not a strip footing, it's a pad footing. So let's create a new one here, equals, in that first pad footing. Let's say it is 1,800 divided by 1,000. Change it to meters. Brackets on the outside, brackets on the outside, multiply it by 4 because there's 4 sides to the pad, and then multiply it by the thickness of our pad, which in this case is, keep it on the same line, 500, but of course, as I said, we have to change that and divide it by 1,000. There we go. Now I don't have to do formwork and reinforcement. I can maybe do this calculation when I utilize it in my workbook of Cupid and my workbook of Costex, but for the purposes of showing you how you could do it in Excel and then use the pivot tables to calculate a sum of all those particular objects based on the formwork and reinforcement, volume of concrete, etc. You can use the pivot tool or the filtering tools in Excel. So click enter. That's 3.6 meters squared. Just to double check everything's okay there. And I think it is. And just pull it down. It should be 3.6 for every one. Then copy. Right click, copy. Come down here as well to the rest of the pads. There's some above and some below, some strip footings there. So make sure that that's in there. Copy and paste in there. And bring that down. So they should be all the same given the fact that the pads are the exact same, 1.8 by 1.8 by 0.5. So 4 times the width of the pad times its thickness will give us our total formwork. So we've got formwork measured, we've got reinforcement measured, we've got volume measured, and we did some validation by checking the length against its volume divided by its width divided by its thickness, and checked then that against what was coming in, and we found that there's some significant differences there between the length dimension from the object properties and this length check. We found that when we validated and went back to the foundations in BIM Vision, we were happy enough that the area was correct, and the volume was correct. So I'm happy enough with that there. We've pretty much got most of what we need populated there to do kind of I suppose, a filtering exercise. I'm going to do a bit of tidying up before I start utilizing a pivot table. So I'm going to maybe just delete that information there, although I don't really need to. But let's make it a little bit tidier. That's just what came in with the export. Delete those rows. Now there's a bit of kind of duplication here, a bit of information that I don't really need, and that might confuse the software when I'm creating a filter or creating a pivot table. So I'm just going to delete maybe these 3 rows here. Now I know I'm deleting the dimension itself or the unit, but I know which is which based on what I'm looking at, so that's okay. So I'm just going to delete those 3 rows. So just keep it very simple. What's across the top in terms of information, and then what's in the rows in terms of object properties. So let's create a pivot table. How do we do that? Well, up here, first of all, we'll click Insert. I might first of all highlight the information that I want to create or have in my pivot table or be able to select from. Okay, so I'm going to select the entire field of information here, and click Insert, click Pivot Table. So the table range will be selected from what I selected. So sheet 1, which is what this sheet is, A1 through Q19, which is basically from row to column. I'll do it in a new worksheet. I could do it in the existing worksheet, but it's easier to create a new worksheet on this. Click OK. And here's my information or my fields. This is like a database. This is the information I get to select from, and this is the information where I actually drag and drop it to. So again, quite similar to what you do when you're creating a map and definition in Costex. I know this is looks probably more complicated. You might be saying to yourself, I could have done this a whole lot quicker, measuring in 2D, but remember, it's a very simple building. I'm going through it very slowly. I'm doing checking, and I'm just want you to get the feel for it. That's why I am going through it quite slowly. But the quicker or the more you do this, the quicker you become, and it becomes very quick, especially on a very large project that might take you days to measure foundations, or a whole day to measure foundations, whereas this process would take you, a couple of minutes if you can do it quickly. Okay, so how do I want to divide this information based on its object properties, or what I have here in terms of pivot table fields? Well, first of all, if you can remember, we put the actual substructure, element 19, or the National Standard Building Elements, into the comments. So search for comments here. Where was it? Right here. So that's going to be the kind of basis of my rows. So stick it down in there, and you can see that I have element 19 substructure. What else do I want? I'll next divide it into its IFC entity, whether it was in the foundations category or whether it was in the slab category. Now I don't need to do this, but it's worth dividing it up per that. So now I've got 2 different categories: IFC footing, IFC slab. Now I could have changed that IFC entity in my sheet and called it, instead of IFC footing, called it IFC pad. Or sorry, instead of IFC slab, call it IFC pad, and then I'd get a kind of differentiation between the two. You can play around with kind of dragging and dropping this information, which works, which doesn't work yourself, but based on my experience, I'm kind of giving you the heads up in terms of how it works, or how it could work. What else do I need to drop in here? Well, I always use, or sometimes use, this family and type. I'm going to drop that in there, and that's the family and type name. Now you'll notice if I actually took the name of the object, what would it do? I'll just show you now. It would be fine, but it would split it all into the objects. So I'd get a list of the entire, each individual objects, which I don't want that. I want them grouped per the wall foundation 1015 and everything that's in that, rather than each individual object. So I'm not going to take name. Now it just depends on what you want, but I'm going to take family and type because it doesn't include that number and thus puts them together. Okay, so does that make sense? Again, this takes a bit of time just playing around with to figure out how you might structure your estimate, or how you might structure this pivot table. But after a while you figure it out, based on going through that learning curve. Okay, from a quantities perspective, in terms of the values, I'm going to drop in what I'm looking for. First of all, or most importantly, maybe the volume. So drop it in there. Now it's counting some of my volume, which is what I want, but sometimes it comes in, if I click the drop down value field, sometimes it comes in as a count of the objects. So there's 18 or there's 10 of the wall footing objects and 4 and 4 in 900 strip footings, 4 815 strip footings. So I don't want the count, or I might want the count. I could actually drag and drop it in again and bring in the sum, but I'm going to change that to value field settings, change it to the sum because I want it to add together. So there I have 8.58 or 8.6 meters cubed, 4.2 meters cubed for this particular concrete foundation, and 3.15 for this. And then my slabs are 12.96, and because they're just only one type of slab, it rolls up into that, or only one type of pile cap, it rolls up into a total of 12.96 in my slab category. What else do I want to bring in? Well, why not bring in the length? Actually, I'll leave the length. Why not bring in the formwork that I created? And that also should be sum of formwork. If it's not, you might have to go drop down, value fields, and select the sum at the top. So click OK. That's my total formwork area in meters squared. And my last one is reinforcement. And where is that? And drop that down there into my values. So my rows, my values, sum of reinforcement. And there we have a fairly crude measurement for my foundations based on the sum of my volume. That is meters cubed. You might have to just put meters cubed up there. This is meters squared, and this is tons. Okay, so just to create a bit of logic to it, and there we go. Now again, what would you do here? You can't necessarily create your cost plan around this, but you certainly got a quantity takeoff that you could input into your workbook or whatever you're using. It could be even Excel. It could be that you're typing it into BuildSoft, Global's estimating system, or it could be that you're just typing it into the workbook in Costex or the workbook in Cupid after doing some BIM takeoff quantities. What I've explained there in relation to BIM Vision isn't a whole lot different than what you're doing in Costex in relation to model mapping. You're using the object properties to filter and map in certain fields. So you're doing it in the plugin Advanced Reports, and then you're exporting it. There's the sheet 1. You're exporting it into Excel, and you're filtering your information based on that. You might add a couple of more dimensions there because you don't get a dimension for reinforcement and a dimension for formwork from the model. So you're creating what is a model derived quantity, but you're doing it in, I suppose, the third-party software. What is very good about BIM Vision is this link, and what I really like about it is this link to object. So if you click, for example, the pad foundation, one of the pad foundations or pile caps, I've clicked that, go into my BIM Vision, and I can see that that's it there. So this information in that pile cap, what's in the actual data itself or the object properties itself, should correspond with how you've outputted it here, what you've selected to come into Excel. So I can check it against the length, the area, just to make sure, but it should be what you've exported. So I'll leave it at that. That is a kind of a quick couple of tutorials on BIM Vision and its abilities in terms of visualization and quantities extraction. By all means, like anything else, like any other software, play around with it and you'll develop your proficiency the more you use it. Thanks very much, guys, and we'll leave it at that for today in Excel.